Good evening, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would give at least my short snippet of a fight review of the Gary Russell Jr. versus Mark Magsayo match, of course, that ended up happening yesterday. And of course, for those of you that did not hear the news or did not watch at least a part of the fight or did not watch the fight, Mr. Mark Magsayo, who I believe now is the new champion within that division, I have to give him a lot of credit. He ended up pulling off the victory in a fight that I personally did not think that he had an extraordinary chance in. Now, I did give him about a 30% chance because I knew all in all that he was going to have the size advantage. He does have very decent power, and he does have some talent. Now, of course, a lot of people, they compare him to the next Manny Pacquiao. Do I think that he is the next Manny Pacquiao? No, not necessarily. I don't necessarily know who to compare him to at the current moment in time. But what I will say about Mr. Mark Magsayo was this. Now, I did not watch the full fight for myself because I was always switching between this and the UFC fight, and I tried to find the fight this morning on the Showtime app for whatever reason it wasn't popping up, so I couldn't really score the fight. But just from what I was seeing yesterday, even though it did seem competitive in certain rounds, it looked like to me that the Filipino Mark Magsayo, it looked to me like he was just pressuring him more. And I'm not a person that just says, "Oh well, a fighter's running." I've never done that. If a fighter's on the back foot, I don't think that that's a problem. But you do have to be aggressive on the back foot. You have to throw and land more than the other guy. A fight, for example, where it was really close, but I think that you can argue that the person should have won the fight, like Guillermo Rigondeaux versus John Rio Casimiro. Now Guillermo Rigondeaux, I can't necessarily blame him for, or excuse me, I can't blame the judges for scoring it the other way because Guillermo Rigondeaux was barely throwing in that fight. But you have to throw enough overall on the back foot. And when I just took a look at Gary Russell Jr., he didn't look like he was throwing an overt amount. It just is what it is. Or it looked like he was throwing, but not a lot of the punches, in my opinion, were landing cleanly just from what I've seen. Where Mark Magsayo, I'm not saying that every punch that he landed was super duper clean and flush, but he was getting a lot of body shots in there. He was getting a lot of pressure. It looked like the dictated pace of the fight the majority of the time was for Mr. Mark Magsayo. And let me give a lot of people credit for those of you that did predict Mark Magsayo to win the fight. I certainly was wrong on this one, but I'm not a person that, minds admitting when I'm wrong because every prediction that I have, even though whether I end up right or wrong, I think it's always based on somewhat of logic. So, it is what it is. I don't mind admitting when I'm wrong or eating a little bit of crow here and there. But, to be honest with you, when it comes to this sports weekend, I don't think I've ever been as wrong ever in my entire life when it comes to this sports weekend. I got the Packers versus 49ers prediction wrong. Of course, I'm sure about 90% of other people did as well. I thought that the Titans would just pull out against the Bengals. The Bengals beat them. I thought that Figueroa was going to lose to Moreno once again. Figueroa ended up pulling out of that fight. I was almost going to predicting Ngannou to win the fight against Gan. But then last minute I switched to Gan because there were so many upsets yesterday. And I thought, well, maybe he has a technical enough style. Let's go overall with Cyril Gan. I got every single prediction yesterday wrong when it came down to it. So, hey, let me give credit to those people out there that got them predictions right when it comes down to it. Anyways, when it comes down to it, what do I think about this fight? I think that Gary Russell Jr., even though he tried, and the fight did seem somewhat competitive, I just don't think that he landed enough. I don't think that he threw enough. From what I see, Mark Magsayo looked like he was pressuring him. His defense actually somewhat impressed me yesterday. He's still a little bit straightforward in my opinion, but he was able to block a certain amount of the shots when it came down to it. And on top of that, the body work I thought was very good. He also was able to get that right hand and right hook in there, which is something that I really liked. I said in that fight that he would have to get that in there because Gary Russell Jr. is not always known for keeping his hand up, especially with that left hand. So that's exactly what he did. He got that right hook in there early, and he was able to hurt him, I believe, a little bit. And overall, he was able to scare Gary Russell Jr. a little bit, or if you don't want to say scare, maybe make him a little bit more timid to throw because the body attack was great early. The right hand to the, head early was great when it comes down to it. Now, apparently, from what I'm hearing from a certain amount of people, Gary Russell Jr. apparently came into this match with a shoulder injury, and he clearly overall got injured, and apparently he got robbed. And I'm hearing certain channels overall say this. These same channels that criticize Vasily Lomachenko for apparently having a similar injury in the Teofimo Lopez fight. Now, of course, we all know these channels are not going to keep the same energy. I'm not going to do that here. Just like I said with Vasily Lomachenko. Now, is it possible that Lomachenko and Gary Russell Jr. had shoulder injuries? Excuse me. Is it possible that they had shoulder injuries in their respective fights? It's possible. I'll have to rewatch them when it comes down to it. But at the end of the day, it's like this for me. if you're going into a big fight that you know is big for your legacy, why would you go in there with a shoulder injury? Why would you not take a tune-up fight? Why overall would you not basically try to do this, and this? Lomachenko turned down the Mikey Garcia fight, I believe, because he said he didn't want to face him at the time with the shoulder injury, but later on he called him out. So if you knew that the shoulder injury was bad enough for someone like a Mikey Garcia, why would you go in there with the shoulder injury against Teofimo Lopez? You know what I'm saying? So it's the same thing like I heard with Vasily Lomachenko, whether it's real or not, I don't really care. It just is what it is because, like I said, if I didn't hear anything or much about it before the fight, I certainly don't want to hear anything about it after the fight. And it's the same thing with Gary Russell Jr. here. Love Gary Russell. I think that he's a good little fighter, but he showed overall that he cannot be an A-plus fighter after this fight. It just is what it is. Gary Russell Jr., when it comes down to it, he had limitations when it came down to it. The body attack got to him early. The pressure got to him. This guy's size got to him. And in my opinion, after this, Gary Russell Jr. cannot be counted as an A-plus fighter. It just is what it is. Once again, a certain amount of people, they say, oh, well, you know, his shoulder was injured. Did you believe that with Manny Pacquiao over Floyd Mayweather Jr. or Vasily Lomachenko with Teofimo Lopez? No. And I'm not believing it here. It just is what it is. Or maybe he had a slight injury, but like I said, if you have a shoulder injury, you don't go into a big fight like this. So at the end of the day, that's not Mr. Mark Magsayo's problem. That's Gary Russell Jr.'s problem. It is what it is. Same thing with Vasily Lomachenko versus Teofimo Lopez. That's not Teofimo Lopez's fault. If Vasily Lomachenko truly did have an injury and overall Teofimo Lopez didn't know about it, that's not Teofimo Lopez's problem. If Manny Pacquiao went into the Floyd Mayweather Jr. fight with a shoulder injury, that's not Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s problem. It just is what it is. So at the end of the day, you should have taken a tune-up fight when it came down to it, or all in all, you should have taken another fight. Or if this was a mandatory, give up your title if you think overall that the shoulder really is that big of a problem. You know, maybe some people look at this as a precarious situation, but like I said, I didn't hear much about it before the fight. I don't want to hear much about it after the fight either. So it is what it is. But anyways, congratulations to Mr. Mark Magsayo. He did a lot of the things that I said that he would need to do in this fight. I did not think that he could do them. But on top of that, I don't think that Gary Russell Jr. had the best of game plans either. The big question is, what is next for both of these fighters? Well, for Gary Russell Jr., hopefully for him, maybe he can get a rematch against this guy and prove maybe if he can beat him. Would I bet on Gary Russell Jr. to beat this guy in a rematch? Not so sure about that. But we'll see. I'll know what happens, especially if Mark Magsayo fights him the way that he did in the first fight. Defensively responsible, good body attack, good right to get in there on the left side of the face. I don't know. That'd be a very tough fight. As for Mr. Mark Magsayo, what should his move be? He could move up to 130, and maybe face someone like a Shakur Stevenson or maybe an Emmanuel Navarrete, who I believe still kind of fights at 126. Or he could fight an Oscar Valdez. Do I think that he would win any of those fights? He could win over Navarrete. I'm not sure about the others. But we'll have to see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.